Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Alan Hathaway. I wanted to share with you about my message themes coming up in the Advent season, which begins this coming Sunday. Advent is always an exciting time for me. I love the Advent season. I love the celebration of Jesus Christ coming into the world. The word Advent itself means coming or appearing. The concept of the Advent is that Christ came into the world. It celebrates not only his first coming into the world as a baby, but it also celebrates his second coming. The idea that Jesus will come back again. And that is a promise that as Christians we hold to very strongly. So this season of Advent is a wonderful season. Throughout my entire ministry, I have celebrated Advent. We celebrated it as a family when my kids were growing up. We enjoyed the Advent, particularly in our family. But I've also celebrated it as part of our church celebration. And I have an Advent wreath in our church that we light the candles at the various Sundays during the Advent season. Advent begins 4 Sundays before Christmas and ends actually on Christmas Eve. Many churches light a white candle in the center of the Advent wreath as a celebration of Christ, the light of the world. Advent, its establishment is somewhat murky in history as a Christian celebration. Advent was necessary to establish Advent by first establishing the date when Jesus was born. On the date that was established eventually in Christian history was December the 25th. And on that date hangs the Advent season. Many believe that Christians appropriated the date of December the 25th from their pagan neighbors because of the involvement in sun worship. The particular aspect of sun worship that was important was what is called the winter solstice. The Saturnalia was practiced on the winter solstice, which was a celebration of the sun emerging from the darkest day of the year. That particular explanation of Christmas, the appropriation of Christmas, actually began in the 1200s. But that is not what was held by Christians prior to that time. In fact, they believed that the connection with December the 25th had very ancient origins that went back well before pagan interaction with Christian and pagan interaction that happened during the Germanic invasions of Europe. So we have to go back and look a little bit more carefully at this particular concept. It is seemingly clear that the idea of Christ's birth taking place on December the 25th came about in North Africa, particularly among the Coptic Christians. The Coptic Church is one of the oldest to affirm the idea of December the 25th. And that particular time or idea dates back at least to the or to the beginning of the 4th century and probably back into the mid 3rd century. The idea that paganism would have been the basis of the Christian doctrine doesn't hold well with that time frame, because Christians had absolutely no reason to associate themselves with pagan practices prior to Constantine. And Constantine doesn't show up until the mid 4th century. So there is absolutely no reason for Christians to associate with the Saturnalia or anything else of that nature with the birth of Christ. In fact, that seems to be the direct opposite because Christians were quite concerned about any relationship with paganism during that period of Christianity. The Armenian Christian Church, the Armenian Orthodox Church, still practices January the 6th as the birth of Christ. What these two traditions connecting together seem to indicate is that Christians very early in our history believed that Christ's birth took place sometime during the winter months of January or December. And because of that, I think we need to look very honestly at this particular tradition. Andrew McGowan, in an article that he wrote in September of 2020, talks about, and it's called How We Got December the 25th as Christmas. And it's on Biblical Archaeology Review's site if you want to look at that particular article. He states the fact that Tertullian believed that Jesus, and Tertullian around 200 AD, believed that Jesus was crucified on March 25th of that year. And many Christians at the same time believed that Jesus had been crucified on the date of his conception. Because of that, if you count 9 months from March 25th forward, you come to December the 25th, and it's his contention that that is likely the reason why Christians began celebrating the birth of Jesus on December the 25th, because of the concept that Christ was conceived on March 25th. And that would make sense because Tertullian was a part of the North African Christian community. He was from Carthage, the area around Carthage. So the idea that this began in North Africa and spread to the rest of the Christian community holds some weight with that idea. So when we're talking about the idea of Christmas coming in that time frame, then we have to look at Advent in that light. It is definitely a very ancient Christian tradition. It has its origins, at least in the Coptic tradition, in the 3rd century. By the 4th century, it was celebrated by all Christian traditions except the Armenian Orthodox Christian tradition. Sometime during the 5th century, the 4 Sundays before Christmas were established as the Advent season. The candles that are used represent different colors. At first, purple was used because it was a time actually of fasting, believe it or not, in the early Christian traditions, and so purple was used as a sign of mourning. However, later Christians began to use royal blue, and that represented the kingship or the lordship of Jesus Christ. The 3rd Sunday was often represented by a pink candle, and that was to focus in on the incarnation, that Christ became flesh and dwelled among us. And so those are the concepts of the colors of the Advent. The celebration of the first Sunday of Advent almost always is associated with the proclamation of the gospel, and that is associated with John the Baptist. The idea that the gospel is proclaimed into the world, the message of the gospel is being shared. The second Sunday of Advent is generally associated with the concept of obedience, and very often Joseph as a character is associated with that, with the concept of the idea that he obeyed the message of God to him and took Mary to be his lawful wife. The third Sunday, again, as I mentioned, is connected with the incarnation, the idea that God became flesh and dwelt among us. And Mary is most often associated with this Sunday because she was the one who bore Jesus. The fourth Sunday is left somewhat open, but generally talks about the coming of Christ's kingdom into the world, and the focus is on the second coming of Jesus. So when we look at the fourth Sunday, we are generally celebrating Christ's coming again. And so those are the ideas that stand behind it. And very often, Elijah is chosen as a character for this, or Isaiah, or one of the prophets that spoke about the kingdom of God coming into the world. And so those are the ideas that stand behind Advent. During this Advent season, which begins on the 29th of November, I'll be talking about those ideas. The idea of Christ coming into the world and the proclamation of the gospel, the hope of the gospel. I'll be talking to you about our obedience and our necessity of obedience to Christ. I will also be talking to you about the power of the incarnation and the difference that it makes in our lives. And the fourth Sunday, I'll be reflecting on the kingdom of Christ and its coming into the world. And so as we look forward to these Advent services, I want to celebrate Jesus coming into the world. I want to celebrate what Christmas really means. And I hope you'll join me on this adventure. God's blessings on you. Have a wonderful Advent season.